Peace, family. Chauncey, aka Ukarema, great man of God media, right back at you again with another GMOGmedia spotlight. All right, family, I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I'm just going to get right into the topic. I'm dealing with the myth of blacks being racist. I'm going to prove to blacks and non-blacks, or blacks who don't know, and non-blacks who think that black people can practice systematic racism or racism of any kind. All right, family. Now, there's a lot of history behind this for me dealing with this topic personally, especially recent history. Okay. So, people who follow me and definitely subscribe if you're listening to this, definitely subscribe. But my actual subscribers right now, I posted a couple of videos regarding white rapper Stitches out of Florida, Miami, Florida. All right, this is a white rapper. Now, people are going to argue, well, no, he's not white. He's considered Cuban and he has Greek ancestry. Well, let me tell you something. All right, he's classified as white. Okay, for those who are not familiar with the white rapper Stitches, I suggest just Google Stitches or go to my previous vlogs where I talk about the antics and the trolling this rapper continues to do and still does it till this day to get attention. But I talked about the white rapper Stitches, and I actually talked about it before in my previous two vlogs regarding his incidents with the rapper The Game. But I talked about it on my previous vlog called The N-Word Used by Suspected White Supremacists. All right. Now, let's quote suspected white supremacists. I was accused by, I'm assuming, people who are non-black of being racist because I called rapper Stitches suspected white supremacists. All right. I was called a racist. I was called an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Your channel sucks. That kind of stuff. That's typical trolling stuff that people do. Just to hate on what you're trying to do. Going back, my channel, Great Man of God Media, I deal with racism. Okay. I'm a black man in America. I am a victim of racism. I acknowledge that racism is a problem. I acknowledge that racism is synonymous with white supremacy. Okay. Like I said, I follow the ideologies of people like Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller Jr., Dr. Claude Anderson, etc., etc. Okay. Anyhow, I was accused of being a racist. I was called all kinds of things because I basically called the white rapper Stitches a suspected white supremacist. Now, the people who replied to me and said all these things never once mentioned about the white rapper who constantly uses the N-word. Okay. And on my vlog where I talk about, the video about the N-word used by suspected white supremacists in hip hop. Okay. I break down the N-word. I break down the history of that. Make sure you guys check out that video if you haven't already. I break down the history of that and bring it into relevancy today and how it's used. All right. But anyhow, no one brought up the attention that this white rapper is using the N-word consistently and no one's checking him, or no one has an issue about that, who are considered to be non-black or classified as white. I can name a list of white rappers who are against using the N-word. One of the top MCs in the game, Eminem, although Eminem, if you didn't know, Eminem actually had a track back in the early 90s when he had an EP out. He had a diss record when he was dating a black female and he called her the N-word. And I said this before in my previous vlogs, I consider Eminem one of the top MCs, but I don't consider Eminem a white supremacist. Reason why is because he was able to give positions of power to black people. He discovered 50 Cent. He formed the group D12, Slaughterhouse. He contributes to battle rap, which is where he came from. He did the Total Slaughter last year, which was a great event. You had battle between Loaded Lux, Murder Mook. You had Joe Button versus Hollow the Don. It was able to cross over in mainstream television. on network television. So I commend him for contributing to hip hop, but also contributing specifically for black people by creating positions of power for black people to flourish, which I commend him for that. And I also, and I said previously, I definitely appreciate other white people in hip hop. I appreciate people like Macklemore, people like Logic, people like Peanut Butter Wolf, people like 7L and Esoteric, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I just recently been listening to a producer out of New York called Static Selector. Dope producer. He has a track out that just came out featuring Black Thought of The Roots. Love that track. I've been playing it for the past 3 days. Love that track. All right, but anyhow, like I said, I'm dealing with the myth of blacks being racist and how blacks can never be racist or practice systematic racism or racism of any kind. So I'm going to prove that to you with facts, okay? Because everything I have is backed up by sources that you can look up yourself. All right, so this is a great conversation because a lot of people have an issue with black people talking about the word diversity in the workplace. All right, for those who may not know, recently the CEO of Sam's Club, which is owned by Walmart, okay, is a black woman. All right, her name is Rosalind Brewer, and she's accused of being a racist because of the word. She wants to see diversity for black people in positions of power, executive roles, stakeholders, things of that nature. And there is absolutely no problem with that whatsoever, because the wealth, resources, and power are distributed unequivocally for white people. Those are facts. So when she brings up diversity and saying that black people need to be in positions of power, guess what? The white supremacists have a problem with that. So I'm going to play the clip for those who are not familiar with what Rosalind Brewer said about diversity within the workplace. Here you go.
You are a rarity in the corner office in America, and it is something that so many people want to see change. Not only are you a female CEO, you're a minority CEO. Where do you fall on who has to make the change and how it is going to happen so that there are more women like you represented in the top echelons of corporate America?
Right. So I totally agree with you, but it starts with the top of many companies. It has to start with top leadership. I can tell you that even with myself, I have to live it also. My executive team is very diverse, and I make that a priority. I demand it of my team and within the structure. And then every now and then you have to nudge your partners and you have to speak up and speak out. And I try to use my platform for that, to remind people. I try to set an example. I mentor many women inside my company and outside the company because I think it's important.
And in hiring, do you demand it when you're hiring for the top spots?
Absolutely. And not only that is I talk to my suppliers about it. Just today we met with a supplier and the entire other side of the table was all Caucasian male. That was interesting.
What did you say?
Interesting. Well, I decided not to talk about it directly with his folks in the room because there were actually no female levels down. So I'm going to place a call to him.
So there is absolutely nothing wrong with what she said, but it's obviously a problem for the suspected white supremacists or the white supremacists, period. They have a problem with that. Check out the link in the description of the original video, okay? Now, if you look at the comment section and you look at the dislikes and likes, it is astronomically negative. There's over 1,200 dislikes for that clip, okay? People do not like a black woman saying that black people need to be in positions of power. And the white people, the white supremacists, will accuse the black person of being a racist. Which, of course, like I said, I'm going to prove to you guys that it is impossible for an individual black person, let alone a group of black people, to practice systematic racism or racism of any kind. All right. And like I said before, I stand on the shoulders and follow the ideologies of people like Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller, Dr. Claude Anderson. All right. And to further illustrate my point about racism, and the true definition of racism. I'm going to illustrate this point with Dr. Klein Anderson. I'm going to play a clip of Dr. Klein Anderson breaking down exactly what racism is, which is a power structure where you have to have three things: wealth, resources, military, and power. Okay? You need to have infrastructure to practice systematic racism or racism of any kind. And I'm going to prove to you that black people historically have never done such things. All right. So here's the clip with Dr. Claude Anderson breaking down racism. And I want to further break down, after he makes his point, I'm going to further break down exactly what racism is historically. Here you go.
We got 3 years ago before we go into it. 3 years ago, before you're going to see massive suicides happening. Because you don't even understand what racism is. I've gone all around the world. Even when I was with President Carter in the White House, I had to take trade missions in the third world nations, in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. And invariably, wherever I spoke, I would ask people, do you know what racism is? I would even offer $1,000 for a person to tell me what racism is. I still got black folk today who don't even know what racism is. They talk about it. Find me one that understands what racism is. Every time I ask them, what's racism? Well, Dr. Anderson, racism is not liking somebody. It's prejudice, it's bigotry, it's hatred. No, it's not. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people that are competing for the ownership and control of wealth and resources and power. That's what racism is. Racism is a group phenomenon. Racism is a team sport. You cannot participate in racism if you don't play as a team. You can't correct it. You're not even in the game. Racism is like football, basketball, and baseball. You play as a team or you lose. And I got all these so-called educated blacks in America on TV, heading up civil rights organizations, getting elected to public office. Don't you understand what racism is? That's why they don't do anything. They go there and tell you, well, I'm in a public office now, I'm a mayor or governor. My thing is to make sure everybody get along. That's not affecting racism. Nobody asked you to get elected to office and make people get along. Now, racism never existed on the earth until the 1400s. Never had it. There was no such thing as racism. You had people, for instance, who had practiced various forms of discrimination. We even had slavery. But to be enslaved prior to the 1400s, for only three reasons. Either you were a victim of a religious persecution, or you had some indebtedness and was enslaved, or you were a prisoner of war. Those are the only three reasons you could be enslaved until the 1400s. About 1442, when Magellan, he went around, Henry the Navigator went around the coast of Africa and picked up about 16 blacks and brought them back in 1442 and gave them to the Pope as gifts. And those slaves worked around the Vatican in Italy from 1442 and about 1488. And it became a good thing to have all these blacks working free around the Vatican and in the Pope space. No labor to be paid for. Other people wanted those advantages. So Pope Pius put out a public edict. Pope Innocent put out a public edict saying, look, if you want some slaves, go get some, but get black folk. He put out a public edict saying, if you're going to enslave anybody, enslave black people. And once that hit, all of a sudden everybody got interested in getting slaves. And that started the whole movement in 1488 and 1489.
All right, so he broke everything down exactly, 100% factual. Prior to the 1400s, there was no such thing as racism. All right, the only group of people who practiced racism and introduced that to the world was the Roman Catholic Church. All right, so all you religious folks, you Christians, anybody who follows Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, the root and foundation of Abrahamic religions, Christianity, is the Roman Catholic Church. And they practice systematic racism, where they use their wealth, resources, military, and their power to mistreat a group of people based off color. And as he pointed out, the first person to actually have slaves, and they were given to him as gifts, was Pope Innocent VIII. All right. So back in the early 1400s, King Ferdinand of Aragon gave Innocent 100 more slaves who shared them out with favored cardinals. The slaves of Innocent were called Moro. All right. Meaning dark-skinned man. In contrast, the Negro slaves who were called Moro Nero. All right. And that's another root word for negro or negro. All right. That's the Latin foundation, or the etymology of that comes from Latin, negro. All right. So, like I said, Pope Innocent VIII was the foundation who was introduced to slaves. And then later on in the 1400s, you had people between the years of 1410 and 1431. You had popes like Pope John the 22nd and Pope Martin the 4th, who commissioned and sanctioned the beginning of the African slave trade. All right. And in 1455, Pope Nicholas decreed that they were obliged to invade and capture and subdue all enemies of Christ. All right. Now, what I'm reading from, I'm just going to let you know the source that I'm reading this from is a book called The African Slave Trade. All right. And you can find this online, which is called Genocide by Any Other Name is Still Genocide. The African Slave Trade, which is the subtitle, by Nikasi Mundari. All right. And you can find this on an online book. So that's one of the sources that I'm using to verify these claims. All right. So again, the Roman Catholic Church introduced the African slave trade, or the transatlantic slave trade, as you may know today. That's commonly known, the transatlantic slave trade. All right. And now, like I said, we're dealing with the myth of blacks practicing racism. So people who are still disagreeing, please show me in history. And I would definitely digress on this topic, but please show me in history where a group of black people historically or individually, okay, but historically, a group of black people that have mistreated another group of people based off race or skin color. I would like to see that. And it has to be a systematic way of mistreating people, okay, based off color. If anybody can show me that, I would definitely digress. All right. I would definitely stand corrected on this information, but I know this is factual information that cannot be disputed. All right. So now, racism, which is white supremacy. All right. Racism and white supremacy are synonymous. Racism is always going to be tied to white supremacy. White supremacy is always going to be tied to racism. They are synonymous because the dominant society, those who control the wealth resources around the world, are classified as white people. These are just facts. All right. So people are always talking about racism. Well, myself, when I bring up racism, I'm talking about white supremacy. When I'm talking about white supremacy, I'm talking about racism. They are synonymous. They are one and the same. All right. Now, the compensatory definition, I'm going to read to you by Brother Neely Phillips' book, The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a compensatory counter-racism codified word guide by Neely Fuller Jr. Now, I'm going to read the compensatory definition of racism. I'm going to actually read the definition notes regarding white supremacy, racism. All right. During the existence of white supremacy, racism, and according to compensatory counter-racism logic, it is not possible for a victim of white supremacy, non-white person, to practice racism and or to function as a racist. He or she can only function as a victim of white supremacy, a victim of the racist, and or as a person attempting to end white supremacy, which is racism. All right. So based off the power structure, based off the wealth and resources, and also the military, they are all controlled and dominated by whites. I just pointed out to you the history of racism came from the Roman Catholic Church. All right. Your religious bishops were the ones that introduced racism. They're the ones that invaded the continent of Africa and enslaved African people, dark Moorish people, melanated people, our ancestors. Okay. They introduced racism, which is white supremacy. That did not exist prior to the 1400s, family. All right. So once again, when I'm talking about white people who I feel may be a suspected white supremacist they may be practicing racism. Okay. Now, when I say suspected, I don't have any valid proof, because in order for me to accuse someone of practicing racism, I have to see something where they have mistreated someone of color, or they verbally said that they practice racism themselves. Now, you do have a lot of white people who openly admit they are racist, but the majority of people are what you would say covert. All right. They practice their systematic racism covertly, where back in the Jim Crow era, you had overt racism where it was out in the open publicly. It was known because you had public lynchings, etc., etc. All right. So when I say suspected white supremacists, I'm coming from as I read the compensatory definition notes, I'm coming from the victim aspect. I am a victim of white supremacy racism. Okay. There's no way in the world that I can practice racism of any kind or any level whatsoever. So whatever names you want to call me, racist or racism, things of that nature, I can never do that. You can call me prejudice, a bigot. I'll give you that, because people like to reduce racism as just name calling. And that's not the true definition of racism whatsoever. And I illustrated what Dr. Claude Anderson said, and backed up information by the group of people who introduced racism to the world, which is the Roman Catholic Church. All right. So once again, family, I just wanted to clear this information up. There is always a major dialogue that goes along whenever a black person in a position of power who goes on and talks about diversity in the workforce. They talk about diversity in the workforce, and the white supremacists, or the suspected white supremacists, they are up in arms. They do not like that. All right. And just to show and prove about the CEO of Sam's Club, all right, Rosalind Brewer, going through Twitter right now, I can see, I'm reading the comments for one comment on Twitter right now. I'm a white male. Should I stop shopping at your store? I know your CEO gets pissed when white people show up. All right. Here's another one. It's interesting. So Sam's Club is openly racist, as one of their CEOs explains how she discriminates. Now let's talk about that. Also, white people love to say reverse racism. That is an oxymoron. Once again, I illustrated to you that black people on any level cannot practice racism. There is no way that we can practice racism, because people are just not educated on what racism is. It's just that simple. All right, let me read a couple more Twitter responses from the CEO of Sam's Club. Time to boycott Sam's. We are America. Race shouldn't matter. Fire her. Stopping our membership. All right. people are just calling for her job, and guess what? That might even happen, because the dominant society, which is white people, they have the influence, they have the power, they have the wealth and the resources collectively to do that. Remember, Sam's Club is owned by Walmart. Walmart is white owned. Okay? Walmart created a job. Remember, a job, which is a CEO level for their company, Sam's Club, and they hired a black person. So when you have a job, especially when you are classified as non-white, when you have a job and you're working at a company that is white owned, they can fire you at any time they want because they own the company. It's just that simple. We live in a society dominated by white people. We live in a society of racism, white supremacy. All right. And again, on this channel, I talk about racism, white supremacy, but I also talk about ways to replace it with a system of justice. And the compensatory definition of justice is guaranteeing no person is mistreated. All right, that's number one. And guaranteeing the person who needs help the most gets the most constructive help. All right, that's the compensatory definition of justice. Right now, there has never been a justice or a true justice system based off the compensatory logic. There hasn't been. The most simplest thing you can ask a group of people, especially melanated people, you ask them, have you been mistreated? Right? Have you been mistreated by the dominant society of any kind? All right. And I'm pretty sure the majority of those people would say yes. The other ones are probably just not aware of the fact that they are victims of systematic white supremacy, racism. They're just not aware yet, and you just have to point them out of the things and the areas of activity that are dominated by white supremacy. All right. So family, that basically is about it. I wanted to cover that because the word racist gets thrown around so many times for people of color, and like I said, there's just no way possible that black people can practice racism of any kind whatsoever. All right, so hope you found something with this, family. Make sure you share, comment, subscribe. Definitely keep on in the loop with my next vlog, because I'm going to stay consistent with this material, family. All right, Chauncey, aka Ukarema, GMOGMedia, signing out. Peace.